In a world where it seems totally normal to listen to a podcast about the Toronto Argonauts, it's the X's and Argos podcast.
Welcome to the X's and Argos podcast, brought to you by Funny Bone Broth. My name is Ben Grant, joined as always by JB. We've got a huge show for you today as training camp may or may not be happening this week. Rookie minicamp is, and the season is getting closer and closer in theory. We'll go into that. We've got news and notes coming up, a lot of news and notes this week. We've got camp battles that we're excited about, a little bit of CBA talk, and some of the CFL rule changes, which we haven't really had a chance to address. We're going to give you our Argos spin on them and why some of these changes may be advantageous to Toronto and why one of them may not be. All of that and more coming up on this episode of the X's and Argos podcast. News and notes. JB, after the draft, DJ Foster, running back for the Toronto Argonauts, I guess asked for his release. The way it was worded from the club seemed to be that he was granted his release. So that suggests to me he asked to be let go. I'm disappointed in this. I'm not surprised because clearly to me, the Argos are looking to go Canadian at the running back position with Adeboboye and Harris in the backfield. And so DJ Foster, maybe not wanting to be used as a slot back, wants to be, a true ball carrier. Just didn't see him really playing out here in Toronto. To me, I think that's a big loss. Your thoughts?
I don't think big loss. It seems to me that likely he had some American interest, and the Argos were good enough to let him go chase that. I don't think they would immediately cut him before camp to let him go sign with another CFL team because you never know what's going to happen at camp. But look, I like DJ Foster. We talked a lot about him last year. Obviously, he really popped his first game. I don't know if they really figured out how to use him. He's kind of like a 10 carry a game guy. So, is he a game breaker? No. I'm okay with him heading on. I liked what he did for the Argos. I think he's a good player, but I don't think he's I don't think he's a foundational or a serious part of the team this year. So I'm okay with it.
Yeah, and I don't think he's a huge foundation of the team that way, but I did really like him lining up in the slot, coming across on those jet sweeps, not only on the actual carries, and we saw a couple highlight reel carries and touchdowns that he had on that same play last year where you had White in the backfield and Foster came in from the side, but the fakes that opened up gaps in the middle, and now you open up running lanes. I really liked him in combination with the downhill running that, we're probably going to see a little bit more this year from Harris. So to me, that is a loss. The Argos have other guys that can fill in that way. They're going to have some speed probably from the slot back positions, and they can still use that jet sweep action. But yeah, Foster really did excel at that. So I'm gonna miss him anyway. All of the draft picks signed, JB, except for Deontay Knight. And this includes the 3 players selected in the global draft. And you got 11 of 12 guys drafted that day signing. That's a positive, but it's too bad Deontay Knight isn't under contract yet. But I don't think that's a big surprise. He's supposed to be attending minicamp in Tampa Bay this weekend. And I would imagine, if things go well there, obviously we're not going to see Deontay Knight for a while. But if they don't, I would imagine he would sign shortly after that, and he'll show up to training camp almost immediately following, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, we only got him, I think, because of that. I think he slid because I'm sure his people talked to teams and said that they had every intention of trying out the American opportunity before signing. I imagine that factored into his slide past Edmonton a little bit. So that's fine. I mean, we were talking, I don't know how many players other than offensive linemen have gone from Canadian football to the NFL. So, to not have been invited to the combine, we'll see. Look, we'll see. But I would be surprised. I'll put it that way. And that's no knock on him. It's just, look, it's a size and measurement thing. NFL players are, from Mars, and CFL players are from, I'd say from Venus. I mean, CFL players are incredibly elite, but the size and the speed of the NFL is superhuman. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw him back in camp, and good luck to him, and take your shot at the big league. I'm okay with it, but I'm pretty optimistic that we will see him back in the fold.
And one of the guys I'm really excited about signing was John Hagerty, the punter from Western Kentucky. I wasn't sure if we would see him or not, because remember, the Argos drafted Max Duffy last year, a punter who I was also excited about, and he never came. And so him signing a contract to me suggests that he will be there tomorrow at training camp, for mini camp and from there on in. And I really think he has a shot at the punting job, because he's not only an exceptional punter, but some of these rule changes do kind of factor into some of his strengths. And we'll talk about that later on, and when we get to our segment on rule changes and how they may favor the Argos. But yeah, I'm really excited about John Hagerty. It's unfortunate that we've now got two Jay Hagertys on the Argos along
What were the odds of that? That had to be high.
Jay Hagerty and D. Amos. We now have to go a little further on both jerseys and on my depth chart. I was working that out, trying to figure out, all right, I got to put in D apostrophe Amos and D. A. Amos and a little J. O. Hagerty. And now Hagerty is spelled differently, actually, so you don't have to do with that. It's Hagg for the punter and a single G for the safety. So I guess that's slightly less confusing. But anyway, I'm excited about seeing John Hagerty, the punter, in minicamp, and we'll see how that works out for them. But yeah, I wasn't sure if he would sign and attend. Excited he will be. A similar story, Trey Ford, and this is kind of Argos related, because there were a lot of Argos fans that were really hoping the Argos would sign quarterback Trey Ford, who ended up getting picked before Toronto had that opportunity by the Edmonton Elks. And so, he had been mocked to Toronto in a lot of mock drafts. There was a lot of talk about how Toronto had interest in both Ford brothers, and he ends up going to Edmonton. Interesting to see that he decided to go to Edmonton's minicamp this week, their rookie camp, instead of going to the New York Giants rookie camp, which would be at the same time. So Trey Ford went to Baltimore's camp that he was invited to last weekend, and he was invited to this weekend's New York Giants camp. He said, no, thank you. I'm going to Edmonton instead. Probably because New York wanted him to play different positions. They had talked about bringing him in, trying him out at quarterback, but also trying him out at, wide receiver or wherever else to take advantage of his speed. Do you think that was enough to get him to say, no, thanks, I'm going to Edmonton?
Yeah, I think he wants to be quarterback, and that's great for the CFL. I mean, that has been traditionally the kind of sweet spot for the CFL, even for non-Canadians, is we like guys who the NFL wanted to turn into wide receivers to come up and play quarterback. So, there's a long tradition of that. And, I'm excited to see that he's going to rightfully get to come up here and be a quarterback. I mean, that's why Warren Moon came in. It goes back that far. So I'm excited for that. I don't know if the Giants totally know what they're doing. Baltimore had him for a look, but they don't need a scout Lamar. So maybe a team goes looking for him as a scout Lamar, but I'm excited for him to come up to Edmonton and put some good film together. I think that's the smart move for him. I think you get a feeling like when you're at camp, whether like this is a real look or you're going to be you're just a program guy. So he probably felt that vibe and come to Edmonton, play who likes you.
I would love to hear the conversation in New York. So wait, why isn't Trey Ford attending minicamp? Oh, he's going to stay in Edmonton.
Yeah,
Edmonton. I love that. Yeah. I think that's fantastic.
That's great. No, 100%. I hope he's really successful. I think that's a calling card of the CFL of letting black quarterbacks play quarterback and not trying to turn them into positional players.
Yeah, and it's been going on for a long time in the league, like you said. Warren Moon, Conrad Holloway, there's so many examples. So, and I hope they do use him as a true quarterback in Edmonton. I hope that's the goal. I hope it is not just razzle dazzle, two quarterbacks on the field at the same time. One of those rules we're going to talk about in a later segment.
Well, maybe
I hope that's not the plan for him.
you could play with Arbuckle, and Arbuckle can toss it to him when they want to throw to the right.
Yeah. It's just it's the left that Arbuckle never throws to, isn't it?
I can't remember.
Down that left side of the field.
I have fleshed the Arbuckle era.
All right, that's fair. Let's talk about another signing the Argos made. Mustaba Mary, offensive lineman, right tackle for University of Toronto. Mustaba was in camp last year for the Argonauts. He didn't end up making it through last cuts. He was really needed at the time. They were so down on linemen. He came in and was an absolute pro, did what he was asked to do, and no surprise that the coaches brought him back, because you want guys like that. And those are the kind of guys that you are going to give another look to. Someone that comes in and does exactly what they're supposed to do, is a team player, is a team first guy. You're looking, to bring guys into camp. For sure, give that guy another call. So, he'll get another shot with the Argos in training camp. I was really happy to see that. It's a guy that did all the right things, and here he is back again. Charleston Hughes, JB, signs with the Rough Riders. Good move, bad move? We saw him pretty close last year.
Well, I mean, the Rough Riders are my number one power pole team. Who am I to question my number one team? Maybe... I mean, we talked about this last year. Charleston came and was asked to do way more than he ever should have been asked to do. I thought he did a damn fine job considering the number of snaps. If the Rough Riders want to bring him in for 10 snaps a game, it's probably worth a look. I didn't see, even with that, I didn't see the speed. I didn't see it, but yeah, maybe you get 10 snaps a game out of him. But I don't know. I don't think so, but he's got a history there, so they probably wanted to give him a shot.
Yeah, he's a legend in Saskatchewan. I like him ending his career there. That feels right to me, and I think he will. I don't think he's going to play nearly as much as he was playing when healthy in Toronto before he sat. But I think it's a little different too, in that what they were asking him to do in Toronto, there were so many occasions where he was part of like a 3-man rush, and you're looking at like, well, why is he not getting sacks? Well, so we're rushing 3 guys.
No, he was double gapping. They're like, Charleston double gap 25 times a game. Like,
right.
What?
Right. Hey, how come he's only got 2 sacks?
I mean, he probably hadn't double gapped in 10 years.
Right.
Yeah. So I full credit to Charleston. I thought he gave everything for the Argos, and they rode him hard and hung him up wet, as they say. So I'm glad that he's getting another shot.
And I'm glad we got the Charleston Hughes experience. It was fun to have him as part of the team. He was great in interviews and press conferences. He was serious. He was also, a comedian at times too. He had, knew his moments and knew when to joke and knew when it was about football. And I thought handled himself really well here. So I was happy to have had a little bit of that experience. So happy to see him back in Saskatchewan. Training camp back at the University of Guelph this year, JB. Other than the long commute for us, I think this is a good move. It's a state-of-the-art facility. It's one of the best in youth sports. It's great for them because everything's there on site, from residence to the state-of-the-art workout facilities, great locker room facilities, and you've got the stands there as well, and the multiple fields. You can go over to grass to work. You can work on the turf field, and it's a really nice turf field, not one of those overused carpets that you see in so many fields. So I think it made complete sense. I'm not at all surprised, but they're also going to be hosting the second preseason game at the University of Guelph, so against the Hamilton Tiger Cats. And it wasn't that long ago that was their home field for a year, while Tim Hortons Field was being constructed. That's where the Tiger Cats played. So that is definitely, we're not unaccustomed to it not feeling like a home game sometimes when the Argos and Ticats play. I feel like that University of Guelph game may skew a little bit towards the yellow and black.
Yeah, that'll definitely be a danger, but I think it makes sense on every level. There's no point putting 5,000 fans in BMO for an exhibition game. The atmosphere will be way better out there. You don't have to get on a bus and drive to your practice field. I think everything about it is compact. You're out of the spotlight. You can just kind of bunker down and have camp the way you want to have camp. I think it's a no-brainer.
And what I love about it is it's not a wind tunnel like so many football fields around Southern Ontario are. Like Tim Hortons Field is a wind tunnel. BMO gets wind tunnel-y at times. Alumni Stadium in Guelph, it's at it's in a valley. And so you're sort of sheltered, protected. It doesn't get too bad. Now, the weather in Guelph for some reason was bizarre last year. I remember, we were there throughout August and I was wearing a coat some days. I had my umbrella out almost every single day, sunshine and then torrential downpours. Hopefully it's not like that this training camp, but yeah, I think it's a very logical place to play, and it's a wonderful place to watch football. I'm excited about that preseason game, and I'm excited to watch training camp. So yeah, we've got a lot of things to look forward to. JB, there's a ton of good camp battles in training camp this season. I want to go through some that I'm excited about, and I want to hear camp battles that you're maybe looking most forward to. So where's your number one? What do you when we sit down and watch, what's the first thing you're going to take a look at in training camp this year?
It's probably a tie. I'm a bit of a cop-out. I mean, I think wide receiver and defensive back are both really rich positionally. I think there's lots of talent there. Probably if I had to choose wide receiver, I think that wide receiver room is packed full of potential, he said alliteratively. I think wide receiver is the most interesting, probably where the most surprising cut is going to come from. Although, I don't know if, I hate to throw names out there. I mean, because I'm not making light of any of this. These are people, working jobs, raising money, we're earning money for their family. But there's probably a defensive back I have my eye on who might be a cut, and there's a wide receiver I have my eye on. I think everywhere else, maybe not. Defensive end or defensive line, linebacker, offensive line. I think those are okay, but they're not. Those are not overflowing positionals. I think those are going to be pretty chalk.
The receiver question is interesting to me because I'm trying to decide, because they basically got 6 starting caliber receivers, guys who have always been starters. So you've got Davaris Daniels, Eric Rogers, Brandon Banks, Markeith Ambles, Juwan Brescison, and Curly Gittens Jr. is obviously going to be on the field after the amazing season he had last year. So that's 6 guys. And I guess my question is, are they fighting for 5 starting spots, right, or are they fighting for 5 jobs? So is whoever doesn't make it to the starting lineup of those 6 guys, whoever isn't starting of those 6, will they be released? Will they be traded? Is that it for them? Because they've got so many guys that are just behind them. Yeah, we've got 5 or 6 guys easily that I'm excited to see who aren't maybe in the conversation for starter.
Brissett, I don't think there's any chance he gets cut this year.
No.
They got some new guys they brought in. Yeah, I think it's really, it's really interesting how many wide receivers they're going to keep. Certainly they needed everybody they could get their hands on last year, but
That's the thing. They lost so many games last year.
I can see 9 wide receivers. I could easily make the case for 9 wide receivers breaking.
Oh yeah.
If you had no limit.
Well, last year they lost so many games due to injury in that positional group, right? Like Brescison was gone in week 2 for what ended up being most of the season. Braverman was out early in week 3 for most of the season. We saw Davaris Daniels go down for a little bit. Eric Rogers was out for a really long time. And so is that what Coach Dinwiddie's thinking? He's like, we need 6 starting caliber receivers and some guys to complement them because we're going to probably lose a few guys. It was a short season last year, and yet they lost most of the receiving core for at least a few games. So maybe that's kind of what I hope is going to happen, because I don't want to see any of these guys go. I'm excited to see all 6 of those guys plus 4 or 5 of these other guys. I can't wait to see Isaiah Wright. I'm really excited about seeing Darius Robertson. He's a guy that I'm really excited to see his speed. And a couple of Canadian guys too, like Sam Baker. We saw him a little bit in training camp last year, but he was they kind of had him as like a pseudo fullback. And I think he's going to play more of that sort of Breskison style slot back role this year. And so there's a ton of guys to go out and watch in this positional group.
Yeah, really exciting.
You're dealing with like 20 guys. So yeah, that's my number one positional group. Now you talked about DBs. Specifically with me, it's Sam Backer because of the Chris Edwards suspension. So we're without Chris Edwards to start the season. I want to see early on who they have sort of auditioning for that job, for that Sam Backer spot, because they could go multiple places. Robertson Daniel, we know, has played there. Shaq has played there as well. I wonder about some of the guys that we haven't seen yet, like Tristan Deku, James Sample, D'Angelo Amos, maybe. So like I started looking into where these guys had lined up most in college or in their last stops. Because if you look at Edwards, he makes so much sense as a Sam Backer because he played all over the place. Like in college, he was a box safety, he was a nickel corner, he played free, he rushed the passer like 1/5 of the time. So that has Sam Backer all over. He does everything. And when you look at some of those new guys, I think D'Angelo Amos probably has the most similar resume, being a free, being a nickel corner, being a box safety. Maybe Sutton as well, the draft pick, Eric Sutton. I don't know if he's going to be quite ready for that yet. He's a little underweight for that spot yet, but I do like him in that spot. He was a nickel corner, box safety corner. And Sample as well, free safety, box safety. He's pretty physical, but his coverage is good. So yeah, that's kind of I don't know if it's a battle. I'm just more curious to see who they have there because it could be so many different guys.
It could really, I think it could really be a break, maybe a break, but I think could be something the Argos can use is that with Edwards out, if they can, not leak oil out of that position, and Edwards comes back, I mean, that's like making an amazing midseason trade. I mean, he comes back shot out of a cannon. And I thought he was one of the best players in the CFL the first 6 games last year.
Yeah,
I mean,
he was.
You bring him in and he's ready and fit and ready to rock. I think that's going to be an absolute shot of adrenaline. So I'm really, you look at the defensive backfield. I mean, I love it. I love what they've built there. I think it's really nice, and I think they're probably going to lose somebody or make a trade because they're going to cut somebody who's quality.
The other position I'm interested in seeing is what they do at right tackle. In my depth chart, which you can check out on xsandargos.com, I put out a new sort of pre-camp, post-draft depth chart, and we got 104 names on it because there's so many guys on the roster right now. I don't know what they're going to do at right tackle. I kind of think they're going to make it American. They may not. That's how I've set it up. So, I've got Tate and Ivy listed as right tackles. They may decide to go with the guys that they brought in to be tackles in Theron Churchill and Dylan Giffen. They were supposed to be tackles. I challenged Vince Magri on that when he was on the show after that draft. And I said, I personally see Theron Churchill as a guard. Tell me what I'm missing. And he went through it and he told me why he believed he would turn into an excellent tackle. He was a right tackle in university, and Magri believed he could continue to be that in the CFL. And yet last year they weren't used that way. Both of those guys, Giffen, Churchill, and you can throw Shane Richards into the mix too. Another guy that played right tackle at Oklahoma State rather. And has only really been used at guard. Is one of those 3 guys going to be the right tackle? My thought is no, because you look at the Edmonton game last year, the game that meant nothing. The last game of the regular season, the Argos put in basically all their backups and guys they wanted to kind of have a look at. And Churchill and Richards were both playing, but they were starting at guard. And they had Ivy starting at tackle. And so if that's what they did in that game, to me, that's the move going forward. So that's why I don't think we're going to see Churchill and Giffen playing right tackle. I hope they do, though. I would love to have 4 Canadian linemen. There's so many cool ratio possibilities on this team. And if you take a look at that depth chart and start playing around with it a little bit, there's so many great options. If you have 4 Canadian linemen and you've got a Canadian running back starting, well, now suddenly, and also you're guaranteed to have a safety, Canadian safety starting, and Mwamba, middle linebacker, that's it. Like you've covered everything now. It means you don't need to have. You don't need to have a Canadian defensive lineman starting. You don't need to have any Canadian receivers starting. And not that I think they'll go that way with guys like Hurley Gittens Jr., but it just gives you so many flexible options, because you could of course have Gittens Jr. in, but like sub him out if you're not looking at Z as a Canadian position. There's so much stuff you can do there. So I'm really excited to see that spot, because that could open doors in a big way. JB, let's talk about the CBA. How do you read this situation right now?
Well, it's disappointing that we're talking CBA again, and that we're not able to kind of fully embrace this return to a normal CFL season. I don't know why the owners do not realize that they have some momentum, and that, to just transition into a season without any complications is what they should be looking to do. So, like, it is disappointing that we're talking about it. God knows we talked enough about CBA during the lockdown. I don't know. I don't know. What the owners are getting at. They seem to feel they have incredible leverage, and they are trying to steamroll the Players Association. We talked about this. I don't know why they insist on that relationship, on a combative American style, core plantation, if you will, philosophy where we're the boss and we'll tell you what the rules are. And I don't know why they do that, especially when the pie isn't that big. Like, if ever there were a league where the players and the owners should be closer together in terms of keeping this thing afloat and working together, it's this league. But for some reason, they think they're the NFL, and I don't know why they feel they have that leverage. And it's really disappointing when you look at, they want 10 years. That's ridiculous. No cap increase. That's ridiculous. They want to get rid of the Canadian ratio. I mean, where is this coming from? It has to be coming from one or two owners who are basically just bullying the other owners. I can't imagine that those prairie teams are like, yeah, let's blow up the CFL and break the union. Like, what that's your first thing? Like, okay, CFL's back, great, let's break the union. What? It's to me, it's idiotic. What are you doing going for this 10-year slam dunk, crushing CBA? Like, what has made you feel like you want to punish the players who have done so much in the last 2 years to keep your damn business afloat? And this is how you repay them with like, Walmart style. Well, we'll just close and move. Come on, owners, get your life together.
There are a few things that jump out to me when they talk about ratio changes, because there's been some mixed information on that. We heard initially that they were trying to eliminate ratio, and then news broke that they, in fact, were talking about in-game changes, not necessarily starting roster ratios. And to me, any talk of ratio is sort of designed to divide the union, because you've got American and Canadian players. 100%. And talk of ratio, you just bring that up, and now suddenly you've got infighting within the union, because you've got a very different point of view on that, if you're American or if you're Canadian. And so to me, that's the only reason that's being brought up. I don't think there's anything else there. And like you said, it just reminds you of
what, like, where is this coming from? If it, in all honesty, if it's not coming from MLSE, like, where is this sudden desire to get Canadians out of the CFL coming from? I don't understand why owners of the Canadian Football League are suddenly saying, you know what, why don't we have less Canadians in this league? I mean, I can't imagine what franchise is pushing for that. I
don't think they really are. That's the thing. I think it's just a negotiation tactic.
Maybe.
I don't think they're actually pushing for that at all. But
yeah,
I don't know. We're not in the room.
Yeah,
we don't
right?
know. But
I mean, that's, I hate that kind of, put a
it's
radical
gross.
thing on the table, and then you negotiate it away, and then you take all the other junk because you took away their disingenuous radical offers. It's such, it really frustrates me. I think it's such a disrespectful, way of doing business. It's not business, like it's business. It's not. You can be a business person and not be a disingenuous jerk. or maybe,
And
maybe.
and the 10-year plan with no salary cap increase. First of all, 10 years for a football CBA. Like how many? What percentage of the players currently in the CFL, currently as a part of this union, are going to see this contract through if it's 10? You don't make a deal with that kind of length for this sort of.
Well,
You're talking about you're talking about players that are currently in high school who are going to be playing into that CBA. It's way too long. We forget the salary cap stuff just on its own. That's too long a deal.
yeah.
No, I'm not in favor of changing it every
If
year and having negotiations every year.
I agreed, right? Like I think, look, I think a 4-year deal is reasonable. You
Perfect.
don't want to just constantly be perpetually negotiating deals, but 10 years. I mean, what are they putting on the table for the Players Association to agree to 10 years? Like, are you giving them a raise? I mean, what could you potentially offer them? It just feels to me like they're just coming guns a blazing. Um, and I don't know. I can't get behind. I mean, of course, I'm always going to be pro player. This is a fairly biased point of view I have, but I just don't see it. I don't see the rationale for 10 years. I don't see how they can with a straight face suggest 10 years is a reasonable length of CBA. I mean, who knows? And where we're going to be in 10 years. Um I mean, I love their optimism that the CFL will be here in 10 years. I don't think the CFL often imagines itself in 10-year gaps because look, it's a tough world to keep going. So I don't know. I didn't like that. I didn't like how they were trying to increase padded practice. I didn't like how they were trying to increase how they were able to impact the amount of practice time a week in terms of personal safety. I've been on the record a long time. I think the CFL should be the world leader in safety. I mean, if we're not fighting for player safety where the stakes are so reasonable, what hope do we have? Of course, the NFL, you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. That's I'm not naive to think that that's going to be an area where they're going to really break down. But for the CFL, I mean, we should absolutely be the standard for safety and protection and looking after players and be able to tell kids who are starting football that look, this is a league, this is a sport that cares about the safety of its players. I don't know why they don't. It's really frustrating.
And the lack of salary cap increase for that span as well. I'm going back a second from what we were just saying and talking about safety, but going back to 10 years and the no salary cap increase with the rate of inflation as it currently is. I think the padded practices that you've talked about, the safety issues that you talked about, like we said before, I put those all in together with the ratio changes. I think almost every single one of these things is just something they know that they're going to receive some pushback on, that they're actually prepared to take away in exchange for something else. So I think these are all disingenuous things. I don't actually think the owners care that much about the padded practices. I don't think they care that much about the ratios, all that stuff. I think most of the issues that we've heard leaked that are outrageous are not really genuine issues. I think it's strategy. And again, like I said before, I find that upsetting because that's not what this should be about.
If I just to kind of put a bow on it from my perspective, I do believe that all of this stuff is going to dissolve. I think that the owners kind of stretching their legs and feeling ornery after maybe having to make concessions that they weren't very happy about in the last 2 years. But the reality of shutting this league down after they just got everything out of storage and were trying to have some sense of normalcy, I just can't imagine that is going to be something they're going to accept and that they will sign a shorter deal and punt on this and come back to it in 3 years. I just can't believe that they would be willing to create a problem. I really don't. I mean, if they do, I would. Well, I'll have another rant, but I just don't think the owners will. I think they kind of took their ownership out for a walk, and I think normalcy will rule the day.
Hopefully, by the time you're listening to this podcast, there's been some news on that, because apparently there's going to be another proposal offered tomorrow from the owners to the Players Association, because we're kind of running out of days here. The union's telling its quarterbacks not to show up to rookie mini camp, which they were supposed to do. They're advising players not to travel. The owners quickly came out and said, "Well, hang on, we will feed you, we will accommodate you, even if there is a legal strike." Because most teams are going to be or are in a legal strike position, I think, with the exception of the Alberta teams. And so, with all this going on, maybe by the time we get to midday Wednesday, we're hearing positive news, and this new proposal is far more reasonable, and we can get back to thinking about the excitement of 2022 CFL football.
Also, I meant to mention it last week, but shout out to Dave Naylor for having his NFL helmet turned sideways. That was good. That was good work. Looked good on the draft. Looked sharp. So shout out to him.
JB, let's talk about some of these rule changes. So a bunch of different rule changes for this season. I think there are quite a few of them that favor the Argos. So let's go through them, pretty quickly, but one by one we'll go through them. So a lot of emphasis on field position, on increasing scoring, the exciting plays, the kick returns, stuff like that. So first of all no yards penalties are 15 yards. So you can't get that 5-yard variety. So if you're not familiar with the rule, it's massive. It's massive. This is a really big change. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the rule, if you were within that sort of 5-yard halo when the kick returner caught the ball, that was a 15-yard penalty. But if it was bouncing and you were within that 5-yard halo, then it was just a 5-yard penalty. And so we saw last year, especially with Dedman and other returners really having big games, teams just started saying, okay, well, we'll just give up that 5-yard penalty then. Let's kick a bouncer and just get within that 5-yard halo and make a tackle. You can't do that anymore. You know why I think this is good for the Argos? It didn't go unnoticed. They brought in a ton of kick return, punt return guys this offseason. So you got Ernest Edwards, Darius Robertson, Speedy B, D'Angelo Amos, Isaiah Wright, Chandler Worthy, all of these guys. Last year we were struggling to find a returner. This year suddenly there's a boatload of them. And I think that's got to be because they knew this rule was coming.
Yep, love it. I think it's great. I'm all for radical rule changes, and even if it goes terribly, okay. I've always said that about the CFL, that try things. Why not? Why not? We should be freer than our more conservative American cousin. Try stuff and see what works. So I love it. I think that's a great rule change.
The other special teams rule is you can no longer punt out of bounds unless it's inside the 15.
Yep, love it.
And if you do, it's a 15-yard penalty. So it used to be the 20, now it's the 15. Here's why I think this is an advantage for the Argos. This goes back to John Hagerty from Western Kentucky. This guy is a highly accurate punter. Not only was he averaging, 48, 49 yards a punt last season with Western Kentucky, he's extremely accurate. He has a very high inside the 20 to touchback ratio. He knows exactly where that ball is going. If he does come in and ends up taking that punting job and leaves sort of Beatty as the field goal specialist, he's a punter that should do very well with that rule. So I think that does give an advantage to the Argos.
I think that rule is going to have a huge impact on midfield punting. I hate midfield punting with a passion hotter than the sun. So I'm all for it because, okay, get your midfield punt. Okay, he shanks it out of bounds. Now you add 15. What have you given up? You've given up the ball for 5 yards of field. I love it. It's ridiculous. Any team that punts midfield, it drives me bonkers. So I love that. I think it puts the pressure on the punter, but I think more than that, puts the pressure on the OC because they're going to find out, look, directional punting is not is not a science, it's an art. It's not like throwing a ball. So you can't set your watch by coffin corner. So you got to be real careful midfield. You want to punt that ball. So I think it's going to increase the amount of times teams go for it, and that's exactly what it should be trying to do.
Yeah, I see you've been reading my mail. I had written down these things to talk about exactly with these rule changes. All of these rule changes, when you combine them together, what they're going to turn into, maybe less about special teams and more about going for it on third down. Because now you're at your own 50 and, third and 5, third and 4, you're thinking about that. And a few years ago, there's no way you think about that.
You kick it out at the 35 and then at 15, like you've given up the ball for nothing.
Yeah, or it's a no yards penalty for another 15 or, whatever it is. You're encouraging teams to go for it on third.
Both of those plays are 100% designed to make teams go for it, which they should for the love of all that is holy. Stop punting the ball at the middle of the field.
And if we can add on to that, drives are now starting from the 40 instead of the 35 following field goals and rouges.
Huge.
So you add, and this adds to the riskiness of punting as well, because suddenly your 1 point rouge, it's still a point, but you really don't want a rouge at most stages of the game, because now the other team is coming out to the 40.
Yeah,
so,
or even a field goal, which is fine, but that's still great starting position. So what wouldn't you rather a touchdown? I think it puts more in the go for a touchdown column, which I love.
And kickoffs are now from the 30 instead of the 35. So these last couple of rules, these are Boris Beatty rules, right? This is great for the Argos. Boris Beatty, teams starting your drive on the 40 instead of the 35. Well, you just got 5 yards closer to Boris Beatty's field goal range. You only need 15 yards now, and you're in Beatty field goal range, which is ludicrous. But yeah, he was a monster last year from over 50. And kickoffs, from the 30 instead of the 35. Again, Boris Beatty can kick the ball off into the parking lot. So that's another advantage for Toronto. So yeah, I love these rules with a Toronto skew.
And then probably the biggest change is the hash marks.
Yeah, and that's the next one. And this one I don't think is an advantage for Toronto. I think this is actually a disadvantage. So the hash marks are now going to be 28 yards from the sideline instead of 24 yards from the sideline. They're 9 yards apart instead of 17 yards apart. The goal for this rule change is to get the Z receiver and the field side corner more involved, because a lot of teams were basically playing 11 on 11 and just leaving their Z out there on an island with the field corner, and those guys just weren't involved. This is a disadvantage for Toronto because that wasn't the case with McLeod Bethel Thompson and Curly Gittens Jr. last year. Gittens Jr. was playing Z, and he was one of the most targeted receivers on the team because McLeod Bethel Thompson has a cannon. You remember some of those passes last year? They were 5-yard outs that traveled 60 yards because the ball was on the far hash. He's one of the few quarterbacks that could do that. So this is a little bit of a disadvantage for the Argos, but there's some really interesting ways that this is going to affect gameplay, I think.
It will. I think exactly like you say, in some ways it was almost like a tilted field. And basically everybody's running plays to the boundary. And so I think that this hopefully opens up, as their hope is, opens up playbooks, opens up, more mirror stuff. I'm excited to see it, how it impacts teams. It may not, to be honest. I could see that maybe it doesn't end up, but I think it probably helps the running games as well, because I think it makes it a little tougher to predict. So maybe you mix in more runs. So I don't know. I'm fascinated by it. I like it. I'm just curious to see if Canadian high school football, how quickly they adopt it.
Yeah, and it's better for field goal kickers too, because suddenly you're not kicking.
CIAU or sort of the U.
U Sports, yeah. So it drives me up the wall that you still don't call it U
I
Sports
do. Well,
after
the
the
CIAU
however many
plays
years.
at the Sky Dome down the road from the ACC.
Right, right. So yeah, it's going to affect positions like Z, like field corner. It's going to affect the halfback, field halfback position. It's going to affect the Sam position. But I think it's going to take a few games for coaches to really figure out where they can sort of squeeze out that extra little bit of yardage. It's going to take some time, and eventually they'll find, oh yeah, okay, I can do a little bit more of this now. But I don't think we'll really see that till midseason.
That's a really interesting point too, because like, how will it affect field halfback? Will it open up how many people can play that side and play that position, where it's almost like you're not really field halfback anymore? It's really more like a split position, So that's interesting too. I think from the Argo perspective, is does it open up who can play that position, and how does that affect who they keep?
Now, you know what I think this is going to do, which is not the intention, but I think this is going to, over time, reduce the number of Canadian receivers and corners you see. I think you're going to see an increase in the use of Canadian linemen, especially right tackles. I think you're going to see an increase in the use of Canadian linebackers, Canadian defensive linemen, and very few defensive backs, defensive backs and receivers.
They used to hide people out there.
Yeah, and you can't really do that as well now with the new hash mark. So we'll see. I'm interested to see that one. The last two rule changes are pretty small ones that I don't really care about too much. There's a 15-yard penalty for pretending to slide, like we saw. Who's the University of Pittsburgh quarterback that was drafted?
Pickett?
Yeah, Kenny Pickett. That's right, the Kenny Pickett slide rule. But that didn't, I'd never seen that except for Kenny Pickett doing it. He's the only guy.
I've never seen it in the CFL either. Guys know. Like, that's just not on, and like, look, you're gonna get your clock cleaned if you do that. So I think guys know that is not a sustainable ploy.
I can't believe he got a touchdown on that play too.
But he was graduating, so like it's fine. But guys know you can't do that in the CFL. You're gonna get knocked off your feet.
And then the other rule change is 2 quarterbacks are allowed on the field at the same time. I'm not a fan of this kind of offense. I actually don't mind showing it from time to time, but really only just to make the defense prep for it. I don't actually I don't care to use it. It's a little too gimmicky for me. I don't mind little gimmicks. That's too much for me. But why I like that rule change is it was just sort of silly that you couldn't do it. So every other football league that you have, you're able to do that, but the CFL. And so now you are allowed to. You shouldn't, but you can at least. That's how I look at it. Well, JB, that will just about do it for us on this edition of the X's and Argos podcast. We've hopefully got some real football to talk about next week. You got mini camp starting up. We've got players reporting to camp on Sunday. Fingers crossed that it all goes well. Hopefully next time we talk to you, we're talking about real Argos football and camp at the University of Guelph. For JB, this is Ben Grant saying so long, and may all your pre-snap reads be good ones. I'll see ya.